John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Welcome to War of the Rebellion, Stories of the Civil War. I am your host, Leon, and this is a reading of the history of the 72nd Indiana Volunteer Infantry of the Mounted Lightning Brigade. Written and compiled by B.F. McGee. Chapter 6. August 19th to August 23rd, at Lebanon. Camp Lucy Carson. Why we were so hurried. Battalion drill. Confiscation of a tavern for a hospital. Picket duty and incidents. Negroes on picket and in camp. We at first called our camp in Hood's Meadow, Camp Dumont. And some letters written to our homes on the first few days we were there are dated Camp Dumont. The name was finally changed to Camp Lucy Carson, which became official. Had it been named for a man, woman, or angel, it would have been a villainous, hot place all the same. Before we resume duties, let a word be said in explanation of why we were so hurried into military birth, and so hurried after born, and so hastily tumbled down to this place. Buell was in full retreat before Bragg, and Morgan's raiders and other small bands of rebels, as well as non-militant rebels, were doing all they could to destroy the Union wagon trains, capture artillery, and annoy and impede the progress of the retreating army. We were hurried forward to help guard the railroad over which the retreating army was receiving its supplies. For Buell didn't know how to live off of the country, to aid in checking Bragg's advance and attend to Morgan. Lebanon was an important post and must be held until our retreating army could get between it and Louisville. The enemy was making a desperate effort to flank the army of Buell and capture both Louisville and Cincinnati, and for a few days it seemed that he might succeed. It was a perilous passage in the history of the war. Troops were hurrying from other states to the rescue, and Governor Morton, ever first in filling the quotas of Indiana, had hurried forward the 72nd, as one of the best of the new regiments. Some weeks before it would have been sent to the front, had there been no such crisis. That General Dumont, a brave and experienced officer, was given command of us, that we constituted his sole command until after Lebanon was reached, that we were sent to so important a point directly in the face of the enemy, that Colonel A.O. Miller, another brave and experienced officer, was made our colonel in a few days, shows what reliance was placed in our regiment in its infancy. Comrades, those of you whom God has given to survive those fiery days, and the days since the close of the service. It is some compensation to know that our initial service was hard because our country had to have such service or perish, and because our immortal war governor, O.P. Morton, believed the material of the 72nd to be of the best quality, and that it would stand the test of such a trial. He was not deceived. Here we are, in the very front of the army, liable to attack any moment, and have never had battalion drill, but very few of the companies have made attempts to drill. We are very raw troops, almost raw all over in our new shoes, and socks, and hog hair shirts, and rawest of all in drill. General Dumont determined that he would at once give us drill enough to hold together. So on the 20th, the very next day after we got into camp, he ordered battalion drill, The company officers got their companies together as well as possible, and much better than at Lafayette, for each had been studying Hardee with all energy. Adjutant Rice formed the battalion in his quiet, exact manner, giving each officer and non-commissioned officer all the instructions possible in so short a time. He marched to his post in front of the regiment, saluted the general, and said, "The battalion is formed." The general looked at the battalion for a little while as he sat on his horse with drawn sword, and then sang out in nasal accent, "Officers and non-commissioned officers, to the front and center, march." Captain Heron of Company A and Captain Carr of Company B, memory serves us right, were the only officers who responded to the command and went to the front. The other officers stood in bewilderment, as if willing to run or do anything else if they only knew what to do. The general could not restrain himself, and yelled at the top of his voice, "Why don't you obey the command?" No movement, and he again yelled, "Well, if you aren't the damnedest, greenest set that I ever saw in all my life." And as no one disputed his word, he proceeded to belabor us more heavily. Adjutant Rice suggested that perhaps if he should go and give a little aid there, would be a general response. The general told him to go and get them up here some way or other. I want to tell them something. The adjutant came along the line, and a few words from him brought all the officers to the front, where they saluted the general and awaited his few words. He proceeded to tell us that few of us knew anything about drilling, and to impress upon us the necessity of learning how to execute some battalion movements immediately, as we were in front of the enemy and liable to attack at any time. "A regiment cannot hold together when not under fire if it has no drill," said the general, "and without it will become a panic-stricken mob under fire." He then told us what our respective duties would be in a few simple movements he wished to make, and sent us back to our places. The command was given, "By the right of companies into column, march." 2 or 3 companies executed the command pretty well, but all the others became as miserably tangled as a 6-mule team hitched up for the first time. Company cut company in two. Company telescoped into company. Officers were cut off from their companies, and what should have been a column was a torn and tattered mob. Captain Hanna was roaring out, "Here, Company H! Where the devil are you?" Captain Carr was requesting Company G to untangle and get out of Company B, while Captain Heron of Company A was making similar requests of Company I, and Captain La Follette was hustling around like an old hen that had lost her chickens. General Dumont made music to this confusion by piping out red-hot oaths from his horse as he rode up and down the tangled battalion. The sun was hot, and in their confusion the officers sweat until the perspiration poured down in blinding streams over their faces. The captains sweat most of all, because they were cursed most by General Dumont. Again the battalion was placed in line. Again the officers were called to the front and center. Again instructed and sent back to their places, and again the command, "By the right of companies into column, march," was given. This time all came up pretty well, but we cannot follow all the details of this first drilling. One time, Captain Hanna plunged his company through 2 or 3 others. General Dumont roared out, "Captain Hanna, what the hell are you doing?" The captain yelled back, "I don't know what the hell I am doing. Do you know, General?" Captain Hanna could swear just as viciously as General Dumont could, and hence had some self-protection. But Captain Hill used no oaths, and was open to the terrible attacks of the general's cursed batteries. One day, in executing a movement, Captain Hill missed it altogether, and as the company was moving in one direction, Captain Hill led his company off towards the woods in a northwesterly direction. Captain Dumas sat and looked after him a moment, and then yelled out, "Captain Hill, where in God's creation are you going? Out into the woods, squirrel hunting?" Another day, while on battalion drill, the general gave the command, "Right wheel by companies." Captain Hanna forgot the tactical expression, and yelled to his men as he marched backwards in front of them, holding his sword by the two ends and wheeling it around as if his company were in his hands. "Boys, come round here like a barn door." But we cannot give all the very laughable incidents of men and officers who were as green as a six-mule team just learning to pull. Every day in the blazing hot sun, the persevering General Dumont put us through the battalion drill, and when not on battalion drill, we were drilling by squad or companies. The general himself instructed the officers at his headquarters, or had Adjutant Rice do so when he could not. And once more, we must say that no man could have shown more uniform patience or courtesy towards so many men with so many wants than did Adjutant Rice. In a few days, we could execute the simple battalion and company movements pretty well, and General Dumont said to us, "I think you could now hold together like two tom kittens tied by the tails and hung over a pole." Every officer and man was making his best efforts to learn, for we were seriously impressed that our lives and safety depended on our rapid progress in drill. And here be said, that General Dumont could be as serious and civil as anyone when occasion required. The sick were increasing on our hands daily, and a regimental hospital must be established where they could be properly treated. Major Kirkpatrick commanded Captain Robinson to take a detail of men and go into Lebanon and select a proper building, such as one as Surgeon Johnson would think proper. The surgeon selected a tavern, kept by a lady whose husband was in the rebel army at that time. She was respectfully informed of the determination to convert her house into a hospital, and thereupon lost reason and raved and railed. Captain Robinson proceeded to execute the order in a quiet but firm manner under the direction of the surgeon, and the landlady, finding she could not stop him and his men, flew to the major, who heard her patiently until she launched into unladylike abuse of the Union soldiers, when he informed her in a sentence that was spiked, that as long as ladies keep their place and use proper language, they are respected, but when they depart from either, they are not, and told her to at once leave his quarters. Of course, the tavern was used as a hospital long as we remained at Lebanon, and when we left, the lady was given a statement of the fact, which has no doubt been made the basis of a heavy claim against the United States government, and perhaps she has proven her loyalty and gotten her money. On the 21st, the second day after we entered Camp Lucy Carson, there was an order for 125 men and 3 commissioned officers to be sent out to picket the various roads. This again was brand new business, of which we had heard much but experienced nothing. Most of those that were ordered on this duty were pleased with the idea of getting out of the hot, dusty old camp, the drill and other routine to forests and more freedom. They indeed found it quite pleasant on picket duty, except when night came. And then there were incidents which made the hair crawl and the blood run cold. Officers and men knew that the great duty on picket was to keep wide awake and a sharp lookout. The instructions were to allow citizens to pass through to Lebanon single, or in numbers of 2 to 5 together, but to separate into smaller groups or arrest and send into camp at our discretion any number of unarmed persons above 5, especially men. And, as General Dumont said one day while visiting a post, if there are a number of women in one group, any of whom have big feet, short hair, or beards, separate them from the delicate-looking ones. You can't tell what the dashed rebels will be up to, and they may steal the livery of angels to steal into these lines. After getting into the lines, no one, man or woman, could pass out without a pass from Provost Marshal Colonel Owen. This was very vexatious, and caused many a stubborn old Kentuckian to roost on the picket line all night, mad as a storm and too spunky to turn back and get a pass. But about 12 hours would unbend the dignity of the stoutest, and they would quietly return to Lebanon, procure a pass, return to the picket, present the paper, and go through uttering a good many cheap oaths at such tyranny. The ladies were more offended at this rule, apparently, than the men, and often rallied the pickets about being afraid of women, and would remark in the most elegant Kentucky irony, "When Mogan was here, he never axed us for a pass. He was not so afeard of Kentuckians as you ones from the north." Officers were so prudent and gallant as to simply demand passes and not discuss the merits of Mogan. At night, no one was allowed to pass either way without the countersign. This instruction was very strict. At headquarters, before we started out, we were solemnly instructed that we should, after night, conceal ourselves in fence corners or bushes, and if anyone came near, to challenge, "Halt! Who comes there?" If the answer was a friend, then we were to demand, "Advance, friend," and give the countersign, holding our gun in the position of charge bayonet at a half cock, if we had doubt of who it was, and a full cock if we had strong suspicion if it was an enemy. We were to compel the person to advance near enough for the bayonet of our piece to be placed to the pit of his stomach, and then require him to lean forward over the bayonet and whisper the countersign into our ear. Very naturally, there were not many friends fooling around the picket line, for friends don't like cold steel so near the seat of digestion. If on being challenged thrice there was no halt or answer of the person or thing challenged, we were to fire to kill. We say or thing, not upon authority of headquarters, but from the fact that in actual practice, cows, horses, hogs, and etc. were sometimes challenged and fired upon. Horses were rarely killed. Hogs and cattle, almost every shot. Instructions like these necessarily led the men to be apprehensive of attempts by the enemy to get through our lines, and every unusual noise heard after nightfall created the suspicion that a sly rebel was approaching, rifle or revolver in hand, looking for a Yankee of whom to make a corpse. And it was a Yankee trick the 72nd boys took to, from the very start, to make the other fellow a corpse. One night, a brave corporal was doing duty on picket with a squad of men. It was the first night for them all, and their hair was tumbling about as lively as if they had been in the service 3 months and the graybacks were on a spree. They were not afraid, but very attentive to every sound. The corporal heard the tread of someone approaching, pierced the darkness with his eager eye, and beheld a dark form plainly moving between himself and the sinking moon, but much nearer to himself than to the moon. "Halt! Who comes there?" he called in a clear voice. The form moved on, and the challenge was repeated more imperatively, but still no halt or attention. He raised, cocked, and leveled his gun. But just before the trigger was touched, the old horse nickered, as if indulging a hearty laugh at the greenness of the corporal, who, had he not known he would never hear the last of it, would have shot the old scamp for revenge. We give a graphic and true relation of an incident on picket while at Lebanon, written by W.H. Records of Company I. Just then, a few old soldiers came to see us. These OSS were very candid, as old soldiers usually are to raw recruits, and told us just a short time before this a battle between some Union forces and Morgan's cavalry had been fought here, in which case the former were utterly defeated and all of the United States property taken and destroyed, and the air was full of rumors of his intended return. These things only tended to increase our apprehension, for we had not a single battalion drill. And as discipline is one of the most essential things to the soldier to render him efficient in battle, we felt ourselves rather unequal to the occasion. While these things were weighing upon our minds with ponderous magnitude, we were detailed for picket. It was our lot to be assigned to the Danville Road, 3 miles from camp, when General Dumont came to us and began to dilate upon the situation in his own peculiar style and accent, which tended in no degree to lessen our apprehension. It was represented that Morgan and his band of rebels were not very far away, and were hourly expected on that road. Well, nothing of importance happened until we went out to stand our third and last trick for the night, when we got the order for increased watchfulness, and above all to not let the enemy take us so by surprise that we would not be able to fire the signal of alarm. The night was very dark and still, and the very stillness was alarming. The intenseness of our anxiety is better imagined than described. So careful were we to note every sound that our breath was suppressed, and the rustling of leaves by some birds or little animal was magnified until it appeared to be the movement of men or the tramping of horses. Then, with breathless suspense and trembling nerves, we stood, with our finger on the trigger of our guns, when the cause of our alarm would be discovered, and we relaxed our vigilance. When hark! What's that? Horsemen coming up the road. Yes, we can hear the clatter of their hoofs distinctly. On and on they come nearer and nearer. There were only 3 of us on that post, and there appeared to be a host coming upon us. We flew to the shelter of some large trees by the roadside, and crouched behind their massive forms. We awaited the attack. On they came nearer and heavier. When near enough, one of our number called out in a clear and distinct voice, "Halt!" They halted. Then the challenge, "Who comes there?" was given. We were answered by a growl that told us they were of the canine instead of the human species. Fearing we could not justify ourselves for firing upon dogs, and yet anxious to be revenged for the needless alarm, we charged bayonet and put them all to flight, without the loss of a single man. Other incidents could be related of a like character, but these are sufficient to give the nature of the duty and the faithful manner in which it was performed. This picket drill, under General Dumont, which was continued under Colonel Miller, was a fortune to us. The regiment was as wakeful as a cat, and was never surprised, never slipped up on, during its long and eventful service. Indeed, the regiment was never fired upon, day or night, but when it was ready to return the fire immediately and effectively. Hence, it was never captured. The Negro, that singular and ubiquitous creature of the war, put in an appearance in camp and on the picket line. Men and women came to sell pies. Such pies, cornbread, and other Negro commodities. The women came to solicit washing, sewing, and mending. Almost as soon as we were in camp, a mulatto woman with a daughter almost as white as any lady of the fairest complexion came around soliciting washing. "Are you slaves?" asked one of the regiment. "We are," replied the mother. "Why, then, are you not at work for your master?" "Our master is in the rebel army, and our missus has ordered us to come here and see if we can get some washing." "Will your mistress get the money?" persisted the soldier. "Yes, she gets the money for all we do," rejoined the mother with much embarrassment. Well, you give your mistress our compliments, and tell her we'll see her upon a long and hot march before we'll furnish you work to support herself while her husband is in the rebel army. This is shameful and sinful, and heaven will avenge the outrage," said the just and sympathetic priest. He was correct. While there were many blacks, in whose statements little or no reliance could be placed, there were others who spoke with great candor and truthfulness. They were generally densely ignorant. We heard a soldier ask one who came to the picket line why he didn't run off. He said he was afraid he could never reach the Ohio River. "Why, it's but a short distance," said the soldier. "You could walk it in 2 nights." The Negro exclaimed that he understood it to be 1,000 miles to Ohio, that the stream was 10 miles wide, and that there were a lot of terrible men with terrible dogs to catch or shoot every black that crossed, and that it was 20,000 miles from the Ohio to the Canada border, and many big rivers to cross, and that no black man had ever got there alive. Someone spoke to one old and quite intelligent Negro about there being so many Union people around there. He replied, "Yes, dar seems to be, massa. But it's mighty hard to tell. Ye see, dey keep a secesh flag to stick out when de secesh comes, and a Union flag to stick out when de Unions come. And dat way dey please both sides. Dey is mostly for Deaf Javis now. Dat's a fact." So much to introduce the Negro. We shall meet him often. And we will pick up Chapter 7 next week. My first note is, how did you guys like my Kentucky girl accent? Did it help at all? I just listened to it while editing, and it's so bad, I'm leaving it in for posterity. If I'm ever too big for my britches, just remind me of this. Oh, gosh. All right, on to the notes. So, in this moment where the 72nd arrives, I could be wrong, I think it's right before the Battle of Perryville. Morgan, the Confederate cavalry, is raiding supply lines, Buell is falling back, and it's essentially a race as Bragg and Buell are trying to reach the same location. And Bragg falsely believes that tens of thousands of Kentuckians are going to rise up and join his army at any moment if he invades Kentucky. Does not happen. They have to fight the Battle of Perryville. Everything that I have read during this time frame is that it was unbearably hot. There was little water to drink. And I think, and I know McGee says that they were here as like the best regiment that they could find to guard the railroad. I'm pretty sure the army was like, whoever can get there first. Which is interesting. Now, the wonderful description we get for the soldiers learning to drill for the first time, the first attempt and the fail and the great visual he describes it, and the second attempt and description, and then the constant drilling all day, every day, really helps understand what they needed to focus on. And a really good snapshot into the first couple of days of entering the theater of the war, because there is a vortex of war going on outside of their picket lines. Armies are on the move, cavalry are clashing, right? A fearsome cavalry commander raided the very place that they're at. So talk about a wake-up moment for these soldiers. And they get this little bubble in time to prepare for the conflict, and I wonder what pops it. All right. Now, when General Dumont is visiting the soldiers on picket, and he tells them to search groups of women who have big feet, short hair, or beards, I stopped and think, cross-dressing the Civil War, there's got to be a lot of overlap there. Maybe I'll find something funny. There is so much content in in regards to cross-dressing in the Civil War could be its own podcast. And everyone from the U.S. Army National Museum to the Battlefield Trust Society, it's just crazy. There's so much to read. I'm just going to link a couple of things that I found interesting in the show notes. Go ahead and check them out. Just read them. What have you got to lose? And to end it off, another note I wrote down is I don't need to tell you guys that calling Black Americans ubiquitous creatures is dehumanizing, especially to those that were enslaved and purposely kept ignorant, especially as it was a form of control for slaves. I mean, if he really knew that the Ohio River was only a few miles away instead of 1,000 miles away, then he'd want to run away, right? So it makes sense why they worked really hard to prevent African Americans in this time period, slaves in general, from learning pretty much anything. Because if they can read, then knowledge is power, and they're going to realize they're getting the short end of the stick. So anyway, I wanted to end. I'm going to go ahead and end here. There's one more thing. The ending here that I read, I felt like Jar Jar Binks reading it, even with my neutral tone, and just, good gracious, George. The character is so racist. Man, the prequel trilogy, he just really went ham on it. So, I wanted to officially apologize. I'm sorry. A few of you stopped by the live stream while I was live streaming American Civil War over the holiday. And I just want to say thank you. I didn't see your messages until afterwards because nobody ever drops by. So I greatly appreciate you guys coming out to visit. I apologize that I didn't get to speak to you. From now on, I will keep an eye on the chat now that I know people are actually starting to come by. So thank you very kindly. So Chaz and Tommy, thanks for coming by. I really appreciate it, guys. All right, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a great one, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye now.
Old John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on.